Emma Carter lay in the hospital bed, exhausted but smiling softly as she looked down at the tiny baby in her arms. Her newborn son slept peacefully, wrapped in a light blue blanket, his tiny fingers curled gently around the edge of her gown. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and flowers from the nurse's station outside, and the soft beeping of the monitor beside her reminded her that everything was real. After hours of pain and fear, she finally felt happy. She had been waiting for this moment for months, the moment she would hold her child and Daniel would walk in, smile proudly, and hold their baby. She kept looking at the door, waiting for her husband. A few minutes later, the door finally opened. Emma's face lit up with a tired but warm smile. "Daniel, you're here," she said softly. But Daniel did not smile. He walked into the room slowly, his face cold and emotionless. Behind him walked his mother, Mrs. Carter, with her usual look of disapproval. Neither of them looked at the baby. Neither of them congratulated her. The happiness on Emma's face slowly faded as she noticed the serious expressions on their faces. Daniel walked to the side of her bed without saying a word. Then he took a brown envelope from his briefcase and placed it on the bed, right beside her newborn baby. Emma looked at the envelope, confused. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked it up and opened it. Inside were legal documents. Divorce papers. For a moment, Emma thought she was dreaming. Her mind refused to understand what she was seeing. She looked up at Daniel, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. "Daniel, what is this?" she whispered weakly. "I think it's very clear," Daniel replied coldly. "I want a divorce. Sign the papers as soon as possible." Emma stared at him, shocked. "Divorce? Daniel, I just gave birth to our son today." Daniel's mother crossed her arms and spoke before he could reply. "And what has that changed? You are still the same useless woman. You brought nothing into this family. No money, no connections, nothing. My son is successful now. He needs a better wife." Emma felt like her heart had stopped beating. She looked down at her baby, then back at Daniel. "Better wife," she said quietly. Daniel sighed impatiently. "I'm going to marry Sophia. Her father is a major investor. This marriage will help my company grow. This is how the real world works, Emma. Love doesn't build businesses, money does." Tears slowly rolled down Emma's cheeks, but she was too weak, too shocked, and too heartbroken to argue. Just a few hours ago, she thought this was the happiest day of her life. Instead, it had become the worst day she could ever remember. She held her baby closer to her chest, as if he was the only thing holding her together. Daniel pushed a pen toward her on the bed. "Sign the papers, Emma. It will be easier for everyone." Emma looked at the pen, then at her sleeping child, and her heart broke silently in her chest. Just a few years before that painful moment in the hospital, Emma Carter had been living a completely different life, one filled with luxury, power, and privilege. She was the only daughter of a billionaire businessman, the heiress to a vast empire of companies, properties, and investments. From the outside, her life looked perfect. But Emma had always felt something was missing. She didn't want a life where people respected her only because of her wealth. She wanted to be loved for who she truly was. That was why she made a decision that shocked her family. She chose to hide her identity and live like an ordinary woman. She dressed simply, avoided luxury, and stayed away from her family's business world. Her father disagreed at first, but he eventually allowed her to follow her heart, on one condition. If she ever needed help, she could return at any time. That was when she met Daniel Carter. At the time, Daniel was struggling. He had big dreams of building his own company, but he lacked money, support, and connections. He worked long hours, faced constant rejection, and often doubted himself. Emma met him by chance at a small cafe, where he was working on his laptop, looking frustrated and tired. They started talking, and over time, they fell in love. Daniel admired Emma's kindness and simplicity. He believed she was just a normal woman with a good heart. Emma, on the other hand, saw something in Daniel that others didn't: ambition, determination, and potential. She believed in him even when no one else did. Without revealing her identity, Emma quietly helped him. Through her father's company, She arranged anonymous investments into Daniel's startup. She made sure he received the funding he needed, but in a way that he would never trace back to her. Slowly, Daniel's business began to grow. Opportunities came his way, deals were approved, and his company started gaining recognition. But as his success increased, something in Daniel began to change. He became more focused on status, money, and power. The humble man Emma had fallen in love with slowly disappeared. He started caring more about how others saw him and how his wife reflected his image. Since he believed Emma was poor and ordinary, he began to feel ashamed of her. His mother, who had never approved of Emma, only made things worse. She constantly criticized Emma, calling her useless and unworthy of her son. She blamed Emma for not bringing wealth or influence into the family. Emma endured it all silently. She never defended herself. She never revealed the truth. Because deep down, she still hoped that Daniel would remember who he used to be, and love her the way he once did. The hospital room felt unbearably quiet. Emma stared at the divorce papers lying on the bed beside her baby. Her vision was blurred with tears, and her hands trembled as she slowly picked up the pen Daniel had placed in front of her. Her heart was screaming for her to stop, to ask him why, to remind him of everything they had been through together. But her body felt too weak, and her spirit too broken. She looked down at her newborn son, sleeping peacefully in her arms, unaware of the storm that had just shattered his mother's world. A single tear fell onto the paper. Without saying another word, Emma signed her name. Daniel let out a quiet breath of relief, as if a heavy burden had just been lifted from his shoulders. His mother smiled with satisfaction, her eyes filled with cold approval. "Finally," she said sharply, "at least you did one sensible thing." Emma said nothing. She simply closed her eyes for a moment, trying to hold herself together. Daniel took the papers quickly, not even sparing a glance at the baby. "I'll have my lawyer finalize everything," he said, his tone distant and businesslike. "It's better this way." Better. That one word echoed painfully in Emma's mind. Without another look, Daniel turned and walked out of the room. His mother followed him, giving Emma one last dismissive glance before closing the door behind her. And just like that, they were gone. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything Emma had ever experienced. The man she had loved, trusted, and supported with all her heart had walked away from her at the moment she needed him the most. A nurse entered later, gently informing her that she could be discharged soon. There was no one waiting for her outside. No husband. No family from his side. No warmth. Only emptiness. A few hours later, Emma stepped out of the hospital, holding her baby tightly against her chest. The sky was grey, and a cold wind brushed against her face, as if reflecting the emptiness inside her. She took a taxi to a small, simple apartment she had once rented quietly, away from Daniel's world. It was nothing compared to the life she once had, but now it was the only place she could go. As she entered the apartment, the silence greeted her again. No laughter. No love. No support. Emma gently placed her baby in a small crib and sat beside him. For the first time, she allowed herself to cry freely. All the pain, betrayal, and heartbreak poured out of her. But as she looked at her child, something inside her slowly began to change. Her tears did not stop, but her weakness did. She wiped her face, took a deep breath, and whispered softly, "I won't let anyone hurt us again." In that quiet, broken moment, Emma made a decision. If the world had abandoned her, then she would become strong enough to face it alone, for her child. A few days after Emma returned to her small apartment with her newborn son, she was sitting near the window, quietly feeding the baby. The apartment was simple and quiet, and her new life felt very different from everything she had known before. But despite the pain in her heart, her face was calm. She had cried enough. Now she was thinking about the future. Suddenly, the quiet street outside her building filled with noise. Several black luxury cars stopped in front of the apartment building. People in formal suits stepped out of the cars, followed by a driver who quickly walked to the building entrance. Neighbors looked out from their windows, whispering and wondering who such important people were there to meet. A few moments later, there was a knock on Emma's door. Emma opened the door slowly, surprised to see a group of well-dressed people standing outside. The man in front bowed his head slightly and spoke respectfully. "Miss Emma, the chairman has sent us to bring you home." Emma remained silent for a moment, then nodded gently. "I understand. Give me a few minutes." The neighbors watched in shock as Emma walked out of the building carrying her baby, while the driver opened the door of a luxury car for her. The assistant spoke politely, calling her Miss Emma and treating her with great respect. That was the day the truth became clear. Emma was not a poor, ordinary woman. She was the only daughter of a billionaire businessman and the heiress to a massive business empire that owned companies, hotels, real estate, and investment firms across the country. She had hidden her identity for years, but now she had returned, not as Daniel's wife, but as a powerful businesswoman and a mother who needed to protect her child's future. Within weeks, Emma officially joined her father's company and quickly became one of the key decision-makers. Her intelligence, calm personality, and sharp business sense impressed the board of directors. Soon, she was appointed chairwoman of the investment division, one of the most powerful positions in the company. Meanwhile, Daniel's company began to face serious financial problems. Several projects suddenly lost funding, deals were delayed, and investors started pulling out. Daniel became stressed and desperate to find a major investor to save his company. Finally, he managed to arrange a meeting with a powerful investment firm that could rescue his business. On the day of the meeting, Daniel walked confidently into the large conference room, ready to present his proposal. But the moment he entered, he froze. At the head of the long conference table, dressed in an elegant business suit, sat Emma. Calm, confident, powerful. Daniel's face turned pale. Emma, he whispered in shock. Emma looked at him with calm eyes. "Mr. Carter, welcome. Please have a seat. Let's talk about business." During the meeting, Daniel slowly discovered the truth that shattered him completely. The investment company that had secretly supported his business from the beginning was owned by Emma's family. All the funding, all the opportunities, all the success he had achieved, had come because of her. Emma closed the file in front of her and spoke calmly. "After reviewing your company's performance, we have decided to withdraw all investments and cancel future contracts." Daniel felt like the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. In that moment, he finally understood the truth. He had not only divorced his wife, he had destroyed his own future. After the meeting ended, Daniel did not leave the conference room immediately. He sat there in silence, staring at the table, trying to process everything he had just learned. The truth kept repeating in his mind. Emma had been the one who supported his business, Emma had been the reason for his success, and Emma was the woman he had abandoned in a hospital room right after she gave birth to his child. He slowly stood up and walked toward Emma, who was gathering her files calmly. "Emma, please wait," he said, his voice no longer confident or proud, but weak and full of regret. Emma stopped but did not turn around immediately. "I didn't know," Daniel continued. "If I had known the truth, I would have never divorced you. I made a mistake. Please, give me another chance. We can be a family again. I want to come back to you and our child." Emma finally turned to face him. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were cold and distant, very different from the loving woman he once knew. "You're right," she said quietly. "You made a mistake. But not because I am rich. You made a mistake because you left me when I needed you the most." Daniel lowered his head, unable to respond. "I was lying in a hospital bed after giving birth to your child," Emma continued. "That was the moment I needed my husband beside me. Instead, you handed me divorce papers and walked away. You didn't just leave me, Daniel. You abandoned your family." Tears filled Daniel's eyes. "I'm sorry, Emma. I really am." Emma shook her head gently. "Sorry cannot change the past. And I don't love you anymore." Those words hit Daniel harder than anything else. "I have a child to raise, a company to run, and a life to live," Emma said. "I choose my self-respect, my child, and my future, not a man who only valued money and status." She then walked past him and left the room without looking back. Years later, Emma became a well-known businesswoman and a successful single mother. She built a strong life for herself and her child, filled with respect, success, and peace. One day, Daniel saw her at a business event, confident and smiling, surrounded by important people. Their eyes met for a brief moment, but Emma simply nodded politely and walked away. She had moved on, and Daniel was now just a stranger from her past. Daniel stood there silently, realizing he had lost the most valuable person in his life because of his own greed and arrogance. Never betray the person who stood beside you when you had nothing, because one day you may realize they were the reason you had everything.